Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of my new series on brewing coffee. And in this series, I'm doing something slightly different than my regular videos. In here, we want to take a look at specific brewers with specific kinds of coffee and techniques. Now, I think that this will lead us more into an area of anecdotal evidence and less about the science. And I actually don't want to go too much into the science in this series because there's just a lot of ways to brew coffee, and there are so many different variables. And sometimes it's just a matter of trying what works and finding what works. And then when you find something that does, and you talk to other people about it, and they say, wow, okay, I tried that too, and it works for them. And I think that there's just more fun to be had there in coffee as well. Like, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with the science behind the coffee, and a lot of my videos are like that. But in this series, I'm gonna look at things that have worked for us, things that we are testing here at the roastery, or things that I'm testing at home. It won't always be the Hario. There might be different brewers that I use, and I think it's going to be really fun. So let's jump into today's video, which is very specifically about anaerobic and naturally processed coffees, and sort of those coffees with extra steps of fermentation, where the process is playing a large part in the taste, in the flavor profile. All right, so for this recipe, we've got our paper filter, which I'll get started here, and we're gonna rinse it with some water. And we've also got our coffee here, which is, it's a really nice coffee from Colombia, from the Bader family in El Vergel estate. It's one of our coffees here at Palette Coffee Roasters, and it's a really nice anaerobic natural. So what they've done with that is they take the ripe cherries, sort out the bad ones, and they take the ripe cherries, they leave the fruit around the seed, and they will stick it into an anaerobic environment where there's no oxygen. So they'll stick it in a barrel with water, and they start to allow the sort of yeast and natural bacteria to ferment with the cherries. During this process, the bean, the seed inside, really picks up a lot of the sweetness and the fruitiness from the cherry, but it also picks up a lot of the sort of boozy, winey flavor of fermentation. And a lot of people really enjoy that taste, and I'm one of them. I really enjoy the sort of funkiness that comes with fermentation and that process. So that's what we're gonna try to really bring out in the coffee, is that taste. And we're gonna try and highlight it using this method. So I'm just gonna really, really rinse it. All right, so now I'm back with some hot water. This is about 206 degrees Fahrenheit. And now we're gonna talk about what we've done to this coffee to kind of highlight the process. So we grind it a little bit finer than you would normally do. Now you're gonna have to figure out what that looks like for you. Now we're normally on about a 10.5 for our regular pour over recipe. But for this, I've decided to do 9. Sometimes with some of the coffees, we'll go as far as a 6. It really just requires experimentation, but just generally know that you wanna go a little bit finer. So now we're gonna add the coffee, and it's gonna be 18 grams. Gonna shake it level. And for this method, the other thing we're gonna do is we're gonna limit the number of pours that we're doing. So we're gonna keep it pretty small. We're gonna do 60 grams as a bloom, just to allow the coffee to get saturated, off gas. And then we're only gonna do 2 more pours, and they're each gonna be 120 grams. So for the bloom, as you might remember from my other videos, you can pour the bloom fairly quickly just to allow the coffee to get nice and wet. And a little bit of a swirl as well during the bloom, just to get everything evenly saturated and extracting at the same time. We're gonna wait about 30 seconds before pouring our next sort of 120 gram batch. So we'll go from 60 grams up to the 180. As far as the pacing of the pouring goes, you can try to pace your pours out so you're kind of getting 60 grams in every 15 seconds. So we kind of hit a minute after I had added the 120 grams, but it's just a pacing thing, just to kind of get you comfortable with the pace that you're pouring. Now we're going to let this pretty well kind of draw down to where you can see the grounds of coffee. And it's about a minute 30. And we're just going to add the next dose of 120 grams. And that will bring us right to 300. And that's about 300 right there, and then we'll do another swirl. Another light tap, and we'll let the rest draw down. So let's talk about that for a second. We kind of know a couple things about what's happening. And the finer grind is allowing us to kind of slow down the flow of water going through the bed of coffee. And that's giving us more contact time with the water and the coffee. So it is kind of upping extraction in that way. But when you pair that with sort of these larger pours, as opposed to more smaller pours, like our standard recipe would be 60 grams, 60 gram increments every 20 to 30 seconds, just kind of pulsing up to 300. And that would be a total of about 5 pours. Where this method differs, of course, is you're building up a lot more water with 2 pours of 120 grams. So these two things combined, when you have the finer grind, that's restricting the flow, and adding larger amounts of water, I'm imagining that we're creating an environment where the water can kind of just sit with the coffee and sort of emulate a little bit more of an immersion brew, and it usually does produce quite good results. So let's taste this. So it might be a little unfair because this coffee is just so good, no matter what you do to it. But you can totally taste this kind of candied, sweet, fermenty kind of note to it that is very much attributed to the process. And it's exactly what we wanted. So, it depends subjectively, of course, what you want from your coffee. But I think, if you do want very clean, smooth tasting notes, I don't think you would necessarily be buying this coffee anyway. And so, a lot of these coffees that have this big process method and this intense, or some of these really crazy ones that are like white wine fermentation or iced fermentation or cognac, all these things that, where they add elements to the tank, they are trying to add flavors to the coffee. And I think if you're at an espresso bar, if you're at a cafe, and this is something that you want to bring out from that coffee because you probably bought it for that reason. And this is something that we do here. And yeah, this has got tons of sort of raspberry candied flavors that I just love from this coffee. Now, I think that we could have gone a little bit finer. I think we could have stretched it out a bit more. Now, there is a point in this idea, in this concept, where you do go too fine. It has happened before. There was one coffee with a white wine fermentation that I tried going almost to a 6. Now, remember, this is on an EK from a 10.5 to about a 6. And this is quite a big change on an EK. And it did go pretty far into the sort of drier and bitter and astringent side. And you kind of actually lost the process. So now I'm going to try one more thing. And I'm going to make a second cup with the same coffee on the same grind. But this time I'm going to do a single pour from the bloom up to 300 grams of water. So I'm still going to do the 60 grams bloom, and then I'm going to do just water all the way to the top. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to taste the difference between the single continuous pour up to the top versus the sort of split pour with the 2 to 120 grams. I think there's going to be some differences in taste, and I do think that this method, like I said, relies on having less pours and having larger pours. And I want to see what that does to the coffee, if that actually benefits it maybe to have just one large pour in a very sort of immersion brewing style, to really just let it sit there. So again, we're going to go 18 grams. I will give it a swirl. All right, so we've got both coffees now. And we'll just try this one again. Now they will be different temperatures, so it's gonna be a little bit, that's gonna affect the taste a little bit. Yeah, super nice, really clean. Just very, very like raspberry candy. Now we'll pour this guy a little bit, and I'll let it cool down while I talk, but one of the things that we have noticed, and if we take the same coffees and we apply our standard recipe, so like I said, a slightly coarser grind and more pulsed pours, we get a really nice cup, but it highlights different things. So again, this is what the whole video is about. It tends to highlight sweetness in the cup with more kind of caramelized notes, chocolate if it's there. It tends to highlight some of the smoother aspects of the coffee. But like I said, I think we find that you do miss out a bit on some of the booziness, the wininess, that funk and fermentation. So this was the single pour, so we'll try that. It is still a really nice cup of coffee. But it is quite different. I think that, without I didn't make a grind change for that one, so it did draw through quite quickly, and I think that, in this cup you're getting a little bit more extraction from it. I think that this is kind of a little bit watery, but it's really nice and sweet and fruity. Yeah, generally, I think that this method calls for 2 pours. That was perfect. That was great, yeah. And that's about it for this brewing method. I really hope that you enjoyed this style of video. Please let me know in the comments if you did, if you want more videos like this where we're taking less of a scientific approach and treating coffee more as an art form, as something to be explored with different variables and different approaches. This is my first one, again, doing this, but I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you took some information that you can go home or go to your store as a barista in your own cafe and try this out. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Have a great day.